My name is Marcus Ellison. I'm 42 years old. I built my life from the kind of silence most people run from: poverty, obscurity, and long hours behind the scenes, while others took the credit. I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I wasn't even born with a plate. But I made one. I carved it out of grit, patience, and relentless strategy. And because I never advertised my success, people assumed I had none. That mistake cost my family more than they'll ever admit. It started the night of the fundraiser gala. My cousin, Caroline, had just been promoted at a mid-tier firm and decided to host a lavish charity event for show. She invited everyone in the family, mostly out of obligation. I showed up alone at first, dressed in a simple black suit, the kind that blends in, not stands out. That's always been my style. Let people underestimate me, and they'll tell you who they are. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers and pretense. I saw a few raised eyebrows when I walked in. My uncle whispered something behind a wine glass, and my younger sister Elise, still clinging to our mother's old snobbery, smirked and muttered, "Marcus probably came to serve hors d'oeuvre." It was a cheap shot, but it landed hard. I said nothing, just nodded, smiled, and watched. They didn't know I was the majority donor that night. My name was purposely left off the public sponsorship list because I had requested anonymity. I didn't want applause. I wanted peace. But that smirk from Elise, that jab from Uncle Terence, that demeaning glance from Caroline, they stirred something quiet but powerful in me. I was standing by the bar when a waiter actually handed me a tray and said, "Hey, can you help for a sec?" I took the tray, not because I had to, but because sometimes the best revenge starts with letting the room write its own false story. I carried it around with grace, nodding at people who refused to look me in the eye, serving those who thought I was invisible. That's when Caroline turned to her fiancé and said, "Just loud enough." He always had a thing for pretending. Marcus could have been something, but he stayed small. Shame, really. And they all laughed. The kind of laugh that's practiced. The kind that burns more than it entertains. I stood there for another 10 minutes, holding that tray like armor. And then, like clockwork, the doors opened. My husband Daniel walked in, confident, quiet, and dressed like he belonged in every boardroom on Wall Street. People didn't know we were married. That was by design. Daniel didn't do family events, not because he wasn't invited, but because he had better places to be. But this time, I asked him to show up. Just once. For me. He walked straight to me, kissed my cheek, and said, "Sorry I'm late, love. Traffic." A few glasses clinked nervously. A few heads turned. The room fell into a slow, stuttering silence. You could almost hear the sound of reputations recalibrating. Elise's wineglass paused mid-air. Caroline's smile twisted into something bitter. Uncle Terence cleared his throat like it could save him from drowning. I handed the tray back to the real waiter, looked around, and said nothing. Because sometimes silence is the loudest thing in the room. After that night, something in me refused to shrink again. But before I get to what came next, I need to explain something. Loyalty has always been my default. Growing up in a fractured household where love was conditional and achievements were currency, I learned early on to be dependable, to earn my worth by showing up for others, even when they didn't show up for me. I was the fixer, the helper, the one who smiled through insults and made excuses for bad behavior, especially from family. I paid Elise's rent 3 times during her healing journey phase, even though she never asked how I was doing. I co-signed a car for my cousin Darnell when his credit was in shambles. I didn't even flinch when my mother called to tell me that Caroline was having another networking party and needed me to help in the kitchen. Every time I showed up, I brought wine, I brought flowers, I brought quiet dignity into rooms where no one thought I deserved a seat. The signs were always there. The jokes disguised as compliments, the way they'd talk over me during dinner, how they'd introduce me as just Marcus. He does something in design, I think. I had built a successful architecture firm from the ground up, 7 figures last year alone. But to them I was still the boy from the basement room, the quiet one with hand-me-downs and dreams too big for his zip code. I never corrected them. I thought humility would earn me respect. I was wrong. That gala night didn't just humiliate me, it exposed a fracture I had spent years ignoring. When Daniel and I got in the car afterward, he said something I couldn't shake. He said, "You keep trying to build bridges to people who set fire to your blueprints." It hit me in the chest, not because it was harsh, but because it was true. My family didn't just underestimate me. They enjoyed it. My modesty was their permission to disrespect me. I thought back to all the times they made me feel like I was only valuable when I was useful. When they needed advice, I was brilliant. When I sent holiday checks, I was generous. But when I simply wanted to exist as I was, without performance or apology, I became invisible. That kind of betrayal doesn't show up with knives. It shows up in laughter. In the way your name is always last on the invitation. In the way they celebrate your silence more than your success. I spent the next few days thinking, not stewing. I wasn't angry. I was awake. There's a difference. I wasn't planning revenge to destroy anyone. I was simply done protecting their illusion. They wanted a version of me that made them feel superior, and I had let them keep it for far too long. But that version of me was gone the moment Daniel walked through that door. What came next wasn't retaliation. It was redefinition. I didn't need to make them small. I just needed to stop pretending I was. I didn't speak to anyone in the family for a while after the gala. No angry texts, no dramatic exits, just silence. It wasn't punishment, it was space. And in that space, I began to sketch something far more satisfying than confrontation. I wasn't going to tell them who I was going to let the world do that for me. Quietly, strategically, without a single raised voice. My firm had just secured 3 major contracts: a new museum in the city, a luxury residential tower, and a private retreat space in the countryside. I had full creative control. For years I'd kept my name off the press releases, content to let the partners take credit. But this time I stepped forward. I let the articles run. I let my face be seen. I allowed the spotlight to touch my name, and I didn't flinch. The ripple was instant. Suddenly, the same relatives who joked about me at the gala were forwarding the articles in the group chat. "Did you see this?" Elise wrote. "Is this our Marcus?" Caroline replied, "I always knew he was talented." It was fascinating, watching them rewrite the narrative once the headlines changed. No apologies, just revisionist history served cold. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Meanwhile, Daniel, bless his clarity, reminded me not to get distracted. "Let them see your life," he said, "but don't let them touch it." That became my new boundary. I wasn't seeking validation. I was building a wall of self-respect, so high it could no longer be scaled by people who only brought ladders when they wanted something. I had learned that visibility is a weapon, but silence is the shield. A month later, an opportunity presented itself that felt poetic. Caroline was trying to secure a venue for her next gala, some high-end architectural space in the city known for its exclusivity. What she didn't know was that my firm had recently acquired a stake in it. I wasn't the face of the ownership, but I had influence, and when I saw her name come through in the event request log, I paused. I didn't cancel the booking. I didn't deny her outright. I simply placed the file on hold, flagged for review, and while she waited for an answer she thought would come from someone else, I reviewed something of my own. Every time I had been belittled, dismissed, erased, not with bitterness but with clarity. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about alignment. The more I aligned my life with truth, the more unnecessary their presence became, and the more unnecessary I became to their egos, the more curious they grew. That curiosity would be their undoing. 2 weeks after I put Caroline's Gala request on hold, I received an email from her personal assistant, marked urgent. It was overly polite, dripping with desperation masked as charm. "We'd be so honored to work with your firm. Ms. Caroline Ellison speaks very highly of your design excellence. Please let us know what else you need." I stared at that line for a long time. Speaks very highly. From the same woman who once said I'd never amount to anything that could fit in a skyline. I didn't reply. I forwarded the email to my assistant and marked it for indefinite deferral. That was the extent of my revenge. No rage, no words, just letting her squirm in her own entitlement. That event, which she had staked her reputation on, now sat in limbo because she never thought the waiter at her last gala might own the table she was trying to dine at. Around that time, word of my recent projects was spreading. Clients were name-dropping me in press releases. One feature titled "The Quiet Genius Behind the City's Most Serene Spaces" ran in a luxury lifestyle magazine. Elise followed religiously. A week later she sent me a text. "Marcus, we should catch up sometime. So proud of you." It was the first time she had used the word proud in relation to me. I didn't answer. Not because I was bitter. I simply had nothing left to prove. Then came the inevitable family dinner. Our mother's 70th. I showed up, not late, not early, just on time. Daniel walked in beside me, holding a small bouquet for my mother, and a quiet expression that told everyone in the room he belonged here, even if they didn't believe it yet. The room shifted when we entered. It wasn't noisy, but it wasn't silent either. It was something in between. The sound of confusion meeting respect. Caroline approached with a brittle smile. "Marcus," she said, reaching for a hug. "You've really been busy, haven't you?" I stepped back gently and smiled. "Yes, but not too busy for family." The words landed sharp, not because of what I said, but how I said it. Measured, controlled, a version of me they hadn't rehearsed for. Elise, clearly rattled, tried to bring up old times. "Remember when we used to call you the little architect with the Lego castles?" I nodded, sipping my wine. "Turns out I still build things. They just cost more now." It wasn't petty. It was precise. My words weren't aimed to wound. They were meant to awaken. But some people only wake up when the house burns down. And that's exactly what was happening. The social structure they built, the hierarchy with me at the bottom, was crumbling, and I didn't need to raise a single brick to bring it down. The dinner that night unraveled slowly, like a silk thread being tugged loose from a delicate hem. Everyone was smiling, but nothing felt secure. The dynamic had changed, and though no one said it aloud, they felt it. My presence no longer fit the mold they had cast for me. I wasn't louder, I wasn't showier, but I was unshakably still, and that made them nervous. Because when a quiet man stops playing small, those who relied on his silence begin to lose their footing. Caroline pulled me aside near the end of the evening. Her voice was low, her tone falsely sweet. "I know things were said at the gala, things that maybe didn't come out right. You know how family can be. We don't always realize what we're saying in the moment." I looked at her and smiled politely, the same way you look at a painting you've outgrown, but still remember how much it once meant to you. "I do," I said calmly, "and I also know exactly what was said. I just no longer accept the role I was assigned in this family. That's all." I didn't wait for her response. The aftermath of that dinner sent ripples. Elise stopped texting. Caroline's assistant followed up again, only to be met with another quiet delay. Uncle Terence tried to reach out under the guise of grabbing a drink like old times. But old times are only charming when they weren't built on condescension. I never replied, not because I was holding a grudge, but because I had let go, and the peace that came from letting go felt far richer than any temporary reunion. Behind the scenes, Caroline's gala plans began to unravel. The venue, still under review, was now booked by a rival firm for a fundraising night that would be attended by many of her potential donors. I didn't orchestrate it, but I certainly didn't intervene. Word got around that she had overpromised and underdelivered. Sponsors started pulling back. Whispers grew louder, and all the while I stayed silent. Daniel asked me one night if I felt satisfied. I told him the truth. Satisfaction wasn't the goal. Self-respect was. And I had found it, not in making anyone suffer, but in refusing to make myself smaller, just to make others comfortable. I had learned that revenge isn't always about action. Sometimes the most devastating response is success carried in silence. That month, I made a quiet donation to a youth arts program in the city, in my name. No anonymity this time, and on the opening night of their new center, a project I helped design, my name was on the welcome plaque. My mother showed up, uninvited but respectful. She stood beside me for a moment and whispered, "They were wrong about you." I nodded. But I was wrong too for staying quiet for so long. That was the moment everything turned. Not for them, but for me. After that night at the youth center, I stopped looking back. Not out of bitterness, but because there was nothing left behind me worth chasing. I had spent years trying to earn a kind of belonging that was never mine to begin with. Belonging, I realized, isn't about blood or history. It's about respect. And when respect is only handed out when you're useful, it's not respect at all. It's leverage disguised as love. I began living differently. Not louder, not flashier, just cleaner. I stopped taking calls from people who never asked how I was, only what I could offer. I made my firm a sanctuary, not just for me, but for the people like me, the overlooked, the underestimated, the ones who build kingdoms in silence. I hired a young intern named Devon, whose story mirrored mine too closely. I saw in him the same quiet fire I once had. I told him, never apologize for being measured. Stillness is not weakness, it's strategy. Caroline's event never recovered. She held a scaled-down version in a much smaller venue, and it barely made a ripple. I didn't laugh. I didn't celebrate her loss. I simply noted how the universe has a way of balancing the scales when you stop forcing them to tilt in your favor. Elise drifted farther away. She never apologized, but I didn't need her to. The absence of her noise became its own kind of healing. My mother started showing up in my life more often, quietly, gently. Age has a way of polishing rough edges, and I think she finally saw what she had once overlooked. We don't talk about the past. We don't need to. She respects the man I've become, and that's enough. It's strange how clarity makes room for reconciliation, but only when you no longer crave it. One afternoon, I walked through the museum we'd completed that spring, my name etched into the stone outside. A school group was touring, and I heard the guide say, "This space was designed by Marcus Ellison. He's known for creating structures that don't shout but sing." I stood behind the group unseen, and just listened. That moment felt like a homecoming, not to a family or a room, but to myself. Revenge was never about humiliation. It was about revelation, letting them see me, not the version they constructed, but the one I had always been becoming. And in that becoming, I found something far more satisfying than applause or vindication. I found peace. Not the kind that needs to be announced. The kind that walks into a room and doesn't need to prove it belongs there, because it already does. Peace changes the shape of your life. You begin to build your days differently. Fewer people, more purpose. After the final fallout with my family, I didn't issue declarations or ultimatums. I simply adjusted access. Invitations stopped going out. Emotional discounts were no longer offered. I didn't block anyone. I just stopped leaving the door cracked for people who only ever visited when they needed something. That I've learned is what true boundaries look like. Quiet, firm, and unapologetic. Daniel noticed it first. He said, "There's a different calm in you now." He was right. I was no longer preparing for battle in every interaction. I wasn't hoping to be seen anymore. I was rooted, solid, present in a way I hadn't been in years. The freedom to walk into a room without wondering who was going to try to shrink me, it was priceless. I didn't even realize how much energy I had been spending bracing for impact until I stopped doing it. Caroline tried to reach out again through a mutual connection. Something about a business collaboration, a proposal. I didn't even read the full message. I forwarded it to my assistant and told her to archive it. Not decline, just archive. Let the silence speak for me, the way their silence once spoke volumes. I was done explaining my worth to people who had rehearsed my irrelevance for years. At the same time, something beautiful started to happen. People who saw me without needing to be impressed by me began entering my life. Clients became friends, colleagues became allies. I wasn't hiding anymore, and the right people started showing up. That's the trade-off when you stop chasing validation. You lose the crowd, but you gain your tribe. My firm grew. Not rapidly, not chaotically, just steadily, like a well-designed foundation expanding outward. I was invited to speak at a design conference, and during the Q&A, someone asked, "What was your greatest project?" I answered without hesitation, "Redesigning my life." The room went still. Then they clapped. Not for my buildings, but for the blueprint I had become. And through it all, I never raised my voice, never sent a nasty message, never got even. I simply got real. About who I was, about what I deserved, and about what I would no longer tolerate, even from family, especially from family. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, from my niece, Caroline's daughter. Her name was Ava. We'd barely interacted over the years. The family always kept her on the periphery of things, probably assuming she'd absorbed their values by proximity. But Ava was different. She wrote, "Uncle Marcus, I saw the community center you helped design. It made me feel something. I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't know we had someone like you in the family." I read that line twice. Someone like you. It wasn't just a compliment, it was an acknowledgement, a gentle undoing of years of dismissal. And from the least expected place, that letter meant more to me than all their previous proud of yous combined, because it came without strings, without ego, without a request. Just honesty. The kind that doesn't need permission. Daniel framed the letter and placed it in my office beside a quote I once scribbled in a journal. "Let them misunderstand you. Your peace is not up for debate." That had become my mantra. The architecture of my life was now shaped by intentionality, not approval. I didn't need to prove anything to the people who once laughed behind wine glasses. Their laughter had long since faded into silence. And in that silence, I built something better than acceptance. I built legacy. Funny thing about revenge, people expect it to come with fire and fury, but the most lasting kind is quiet. It looks like peace. It sounds like your name on a plaque where they never imagined it would be. It feels like choosing not to reply and realizing that's the final word. That's the kind of victory they'll never understand. I watched as Caroline's influence waned. Her fundraisers drew fewer guests. Her professional shine began to dull. Not because I sabotaged her, but because people sense when something's built on performance, not principle. And without someone like me to lean on in the shadows, the facade cracked. She had mistaken my silence for insignificance. That was her error, not mine. I never gloated. I never mentioned the past when I ran into family members here and there. I simply smiled, nodded, and continued walking. Because I had places to be, places I designed, places I was invited into, not because of who I was related to, but because of what I stood for. And in the end, that's what mattered most. I didn't just reclaim my name. I redesigned the story around it. A year later, I stood in front of a mirror, adjusting my cufflinks before stepping onto the stage of an award ceremony I never thought I'd be invited to, let alone honored at. Lifetime Achievement in Design and Community Impact. Not because I built the tallest buildings, but because I built with intention, with soul, with silence. And when they called my name, I walked to the podium with a calm that felt like armor turned to silk. I didn't mention my family in my speech, not because I held resentment, but because they were no longer central to the story. The story was never about what they did to me. It was about what I did in response. I ended my speech by saying, the most powerful thing you can build is a life that no one can dismantle, especially not the people who once refused to see you. Afterward, as I stepped off the stage, Ava found me in the crowd. She hugged me tightly and said, "You made it easy to believe in myself just by existing like this." Her voice cracked. That moment, simple, raw, was the reward. She hadn't just witnessed my growth, she had inherited it. That's how cycles break. Not with declarations, but with demonstrations. My mother passed away quietly a few months later. At her funeral, the family was gathered again, smaller now, more subdued. Elise nodded at me across the chapel, but didn't approach. Caroline was there too, her eyes dull, her presence almost muted. They had their paths, and I had mine, and for once they didn't overlap. That was healing in its own way. I walked out into the winter sun after the service, Daniel's hand in mine, and I felt it lightness. Not joy, not triumph, but lightness. The kind that comes when you finally put something down you didn't realize you'd been carrying your whole life. Their approval, their love on conditions, their blueprint for who I was supposed to be, gone. Now, I walk through rooms I once only imagined, not to prove anything, but to breathe, to create, to teach, to build spaces that allow others like me to stand up straight, speak softly, and be seen anyway. And in the end, that's all I ever wanted. Not revenge, not dominance, just space to be exactly who I was, with no need to shrink, explain, or perform. I didn't just get the last word. I became the last word.